This week on the Disney Q&A, we're talking about originality. Is Disney more or less original today? Hello and welcome to the Disney Q&A, the series where you all give me Disney questions, whether it's about the movies, the parks, the history, and I try to give you answers to the best of my ability. This week's question comes from subscriber Tim Fodor, and Tim says, I feel Disney is unfairly getting flack for originality. Snow White, Pinocchio, Jungle Book, Cinderella, many more, they're considered Disney classics but are just reimagined tales. With Moana, Frozen, Wreck-It Ralph, Lilo and Stitch, and others, I would argue that there has been more original ideas at Disney. Also, I would rather them test an idea through a movie and then add a ride than spending money and space on a ride that didn't work. What do you think? Thanks, love your channel. Interesting question, Tim, and what I think makes this question interesting is that the topic of originality with Disney can be approached from different angles, and depending on that angle, the answer is different. First, let's take a look at film. What you said is entirely true. Most of the classic animated Walt Disney films were based on fairy tales that existed long before Walt was around. While he made alterations to the stories in order to make some of them more family-friendly, it'd be hard to call these films original. In fact, it's often used as an arguing point on the topic of Disney's strong lobbying for extended copyright laws in the United States. They're a company that was literally built on the back of films based on stories that were in the public domain. Compared to original stories and concepts like Wreck-It Ralph, it's a pretty good argument to say that Disney is more original now than it was back then. However, let's look at it from another perspective. Sequels. Oftentimes, when it comes to the topic of Hollywood and originality, people are talking about the industry's tendency to depend too much on reboots and sequels. From that approach, while we can call a film like Toy Story original, can we really call Toy Story 2, 3, and 4 original? See, that's something Walt didn't do during his time. Sure, those animated features would be based on old fairy tales, but once they were finished and released, he moved on to something different. He didn't care about making sequels to those films. One of his famous quotes, "You can't top pigs with pigs," is a reference to the Three Little Pigs and how he believed that you couldn't follow up on a successful project just by creating a sequel to it. Now obviously Hollywood and our tastes have changed. The numbers show that today you actually can top pigs with pigs, but regardless, from the perspective of sequels, I think the answer flips around and we can say that Walt in his era was more original than Disney is today. Okay, so that's film, but what about the Disney parks? I think originality takes a whole different definition when we start talking about rides, and I suspect that when fans criticize the lack of originality, they're not talking about how original the IP the ride is based on is. Instead, they're talking about whether or not the ride is based on an IP to begin with. When we think of some of the great Disney classics like The Haunted Mansion or Pirates of the Caribbean, we're talking about rides that were based on nothing but the ideas of Walt and his Imagineers. Now, you point out that you'd rather see IPs get created as films first before transitioning into rides, and I think your reasoning behind that is pretty solid. That previous experience we have with the film allows us to form a stronger and quicker connection than an original ride. When Guardians of the Galaxy opens in Epcot, I won't need to find out who those characters are because I'll already know from 2 films. That said, there still is value in original concepts. For one, not being tied down to an IP allows Imagineers to be truly creative in what they come up with, and that means they'd be free to touch upon themes and ideas that might not otherwise fit neatly within an IP Disney owns. On top of that, consider the potential original rides have for helping Disney down the line. Just look at Pirates of the Caribbean. At the time of this recording, that film franchise has grossed a combined $4.5 billion, and it's all thanks to a ride that was based on nothing but Imagineers' ideas. So ultimately, while it's not an exciting one, my stance is that we need a healthy balance with rides and with film. Sequels and adaptations have shown that they have artistic value and do well financially, but so have completely original concepts. Disney rides based on IPs are wildly popular, yet so are plenty of completely original attractions. When both industries have a balance of both, it creates this thriving symbiotic relationship where the film industry helps carry the attractions and the attractions help fuel the film industry. Unfortunately, we don't have that balance at the moment, and I do believe it's largely due to not only the state of Hollywood, but Bob Iger's leadership style. Obviously, Disney is doing well as it is, so it's not to say that things are getting bad, it just highlights that with businesses this diverse and large, there's more than one way to run things. Anyway, that's what I think, but I want to hear what you all think. Is Disney more or less original than it was under Walt? Where do you draw the line? How could they improve? Let me know in the comments below so we could all get a dialogue going. If you have questions you'd like to ask for the series, feel free to leave that in the comments below as well. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.